Okay, next up, Leila and the Wolves. Now, this is definitely an unusual movie. Leila and the Wolves, directed by Heiny Srour. Boy, it's hard to pronounce. Srour, Srour. I don't know how to say that name. Very rough. Leela is the only one I'm gonna. The actor, that's Nabila Zaitouni. This is from 1984. Now, this is a reissue. I think it's been, like refreshed and gone through and just cleaned up all the images and put it all together and made it sure it's really, really the best version you can get nowadays. I feel like this movie is a very lost movie, and I do not know the history of this movie, and that's one thing I kind of would have liked a little more of at either the beginning or the end. One of those things like they did this for Caligula last year when they had the recut of it. Something at the beginning would have been nice for so like this movie was made and blah 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 and had been only shown here and we have now refreshed it and here it is for all of its glory for you, for everyone to see, that kind of a thing. I would have appreciated something like that, but we didn't get that here. So I am guessing any of you out there can probably go out there and do some research and find a lot more out about this movie. But the reason I think it was pretty much lost is you can look this up and you find a little bit of information. But usually after I watch a movie, I kind of have my feelings and my impressions and kind of where I'm falling. And I'm always curious, like, well, what do other people think? Am I off base? I love this movie. Did other people love it or did everyone hate it? And so I kind of usually go out and check out a couple reviews just to see like, am I an outlier or am I kind of with the flow? Just for curiosity's sake. Especially when I'm different than everyone else, then I'm like, wow, that's curious. I really loved it and everyone else hated it. Interesting. But this movie, I literally don't think I could find one review, and that's really unusual. I mean, it did have ratings on IMDb, but when you go to Rotten Tomatoes, I don't think it even had a rating, and I don't think it had one review that I could find. And I would just do a basic internet search. I don't think I found a review of it either. Maybe a couple brief descriptions. So my guess is, based on the movie itself, it probably never got much of a release, and partly because of its obscurity, international film from the Palestinian, not the Palestinian, really, it's the Lebanese, Lebanese slash Palestinian point of view. That alone from 1984 probably made it relatively obscure and not very, I guess, commercial. Never would be commercial, I don't think. But I think that now, just with all that's been going on, specifically in Gaza and everything, and kind of the resurgence of that issue, even though this is a kind of a side version of that issue, it's still the same issue to a lot of degrees. The resurgence of that, I think, caused this to kind of get put out into the light of day again. So, Leila and the Wolves, it's in Lebanon, like I said, 1984, mostly in Lebanon. The quote about the wolves, there's a quote in here. I wrote it down. Hopefully I got it right. But there's some quote, and I think it's supposed to be, it's probably from storytelling in the area, kind of culture in the areas, is that you blame the absent shepherd, not the wolf, for obviously for the attack. So the idea is that, well, the wolf is going to be the wolf. The wolf is going to attack you. There's always going to be something aggressive towards you. And you blame the people who could protect the vulnerable more than the wolf itself. Because if the people that are supposed to protect the wolf just are absent, as in the quote, they just literally abdicate their duty. It's not like they don't try and they fail. They just abdicate their duty. They don't protect at all. They just walk away. Then they are to blame for the violence and stuff that occurs. That's the idea, I think. And I think that might be the underpinning of all of this. Now, it's not an anthology per se, but it kind of acts like an anthology. And the way this works is it basically is giving events historically of the Lebanese kind of resistance against the Jewish state, Israel state, I should say, against them, especially in the West Bank area. I think that area involves a lot of what's going on in this movie. A lot of the events that are kind of depicted here, especially that throughout history from the early part of the 1900s up till like the 70s, I think. Because if you think about it, this movie is made in the 80s. So I think the events that are depicted probably go to about the 70s. But they're little like, they'll be like little events in time. And the kind of the framing piece of this is you have Leela, and she's kind of dressed in white. And there's like a semicircle of women. Now I might be using the wrong terminology. Burqa is what you always hear, but the really the dark, robes that cover everything except the eyes. I believe that's a burqa, but I could be, if I'm wrong, sorry guys. And they're in like a semicircle watching Leela near the ocean. And then it'll like circle around them and it will eventually show you kind of a vignette or a scene from a different time period. And it's starting back in the early, like 1920s or something. And then kind of each time it'll jump up in time a little bit, kind of chronologically. And the other kind of tying piece is you have Leela kind of in current day in London, and there's a photo exhibition of the kind of Palestinian slash Lebanese resistance and battles that they've had and various like things that have happened in wars. And there's just this kind of photo exhibition she's showing. And some of those, I think, represent some of the time periods that we end up seeing in the movie. The other key piece to this is it's all about the women's role in the resistance. And that is kind of the key difference in this movie. That is the special sauce. That is the thing that makes this really unique. And that is in every one of these historical events, you're seeing how the women were a key part of kind of helping these various resistance efforts and also involved in some of the atrocities too were done against them because of course, whoever is the occupying force, whether it would be the British or the Israelis or whoever it was at various time periods, depending on the occupying force, if they start to believe that anybody is a threat to them, and we've seen this with America, occupations of places too. When you see that any member of that population that you're occupying could be the threat, then you're more apt to kill the women and the children along with the men because you're afraid of everybody and you think everybody could be a quote terrorist or whatever it might be. So you see versions of that here where it shows that they really are part of the resistance and they are doing things. So, for example, you see an extended sequence in here of a wedding, which is really striking, where I think this is when the British were kind of occupying much of the area. To get by them and to smuggle things through, they perform a wedding. And the occupiers are allowing a wedding because a wedding seems like that's a good thing and, that's not a threat. But meanwhile, the resistance, the women especially, are doing things like hiding bullets in the food, and the guns are hidden in cloths and things that they're bringing to the wedding, and the whole wedding march is happening, and all of this is to get weapons to a certain area. So you see that kind of thing. There's another sequence where I think for a good chunk of it, the beginning part, it is British, but they are running and chasing and chasing the men down the streets, these really narrow streets with the two-story buildings on either side of the like really narrow, like kind of almost alleyways. And the women are all running to the edges and throwing like pots and like rocks if they have them, and some of them are boiling water and throwing it over the edge onto the Brits and stuff. So a lot of interesting stuff here about like the role of women in war and even also somewhat the role of women within their own society. So you do see the sexism in their own society as well being represented. It's just a really interesting an unusual movie that I like when you have an international movie, especially a historical one, that it is very much unique because it is fully enmeshed and representing the culture it comes from. So even though it's not necessarily as easy for me to understand all of the allusions or all of the cultural colors to it, because there might be a bunch of stuff that's based on maybe tales or stories from that culture that I don't know that would enrich it even more. The fact that it is so uniquely from that point of view, I think is really valuable and interesting to me. It makes it more interesting to me than just like John Smith telling this story, which sure could be interesting in its own right, but it doesn't have that, I don't know, that genuine feel for to me. Anyway, pretty cool movie. Pretty interesting. Definitely not for everybody. You got to be into international movies. You got to be into like the international movies from the 80s that are very rough around the edges and somewhat obscure. Definitely about stuff politically you may not be as keyed into, like as I am not. So if you're into the kind of really going on the edges like that, for me it's 4 stars. For the average person, it might be like, whoa, that's a lot to go through. It's not for me. But if it sounds interesting to you, you might give that a go.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this video. For more movie and television reviews and interviews, please subscribe to my Deepest Dream channel. Like, comment, share, subscribe. And as always, thanks so much for your support. Take care.